The first sound you hear, isn't an alarm clock at S, the rasping cough of someone in the next room, followed by the deep creak of wooden stairs as someone begins the day before the sun has even considered rising. The house is cold, not chiller cold. Your breath clouds in the air. The fire went out hours ago, and the embers are buried in grey ash. The warmth of your bed, such as it is, offers no comfort. The mattress is lumpy and stuffed with horsehair. The wool blankets are itchy, but you've wrapped them tight because the air around you bites at any exposed skin. There's no running water. If you want to wash your face, you'll need to pour cold water from a pitcher into a basin that's likely already formed a thin skim of ice overnight. Soap is harsh and smells of lye. There is no toothbrush in sight, perhaps a rag, perhaps a brush made of pig bristles. The taste in your mouth is stale from sleeping in a room with no ventilation, and the chamber pot under the bed reminds you just how complicated the concept of a private bathroom truly is. Downstairs, the maid is already working. She's been up since before you stirred, wearing a heavy dress and apron, her fingers numb as she tries to coax the kitchen fire back to life with a twist of newspaper and some kindling she chopped yesterday. The smell of coal smoke mixes with soot and yesterday's grease. It will take a while to heat anything. There's no flicking a switch to boil water. Breakfast, if it comes, will be porridge, plain, lumpy, and salty. In the parlor, the air feels as though it's soaked into the furniture. Dampness clings to the curtains. The carpet, though beautiful with floral patterns, hides 100 smells. It has never been washed, only beaten, once a year, in a yard full of dust and noise. The chairs are firm and upright. No one reclines. Posture matters. The children, if there are any, are not yet allowed to make noise. They speak only when spoken to, and sit quietly while their hair is brushed, buttons fastened, shoes tied tightly with stiff leather laces. There's no rushing in this house, but everything is slow and slightly miserable. Each movement in the morning feels like pushing through a fog of discomfort. Even putting on your clothing is a chore. For women, layer upon layer of undergarments must be laced and tied, followed by corsets that squeeze your ribs and restrict your breath. For men, it's a starched collar, waistcoat, and cravat. Dressing is not casual, it's obligation. There is no elastic, no fleece, no convenience. By the time you've been awake for 1 hour, the reality has set in. There's no cozy nook to warm up in, no quick cup of coffee, no moment of privacy in a soft-lit bathroom. Just a series of stiff routines, cold fingers, and tight clothing. The house is beautiful in its own way, but it does not comfort you. It does not cater to your needs. And it's still only morning. The kitchen is where most of the household activity begins, and yet it is the least comfortable room in the Victorian house. It is not a warm, cheery place filled with the scent of pastries and morning coffee. Instead, it's a place of relentless labor, where soot clings to every surface and the smoke from the coal-fired range settles into your hair, your clothes, and your lungs. If the household is fortunate enough to have one, is bent over the hearth, her sleeves rolled up, face flushed from crouching too close to the heat. Her hands are already red from scrubbing the floorboards at dawn and blackened at the fingertips from working the grate. She's boiling water, not in an electric kettle, but in a great iron pot balanced precariously on the range. It takes time, more time than you'd like. Everything in this house takes time. If there is no maid, it falls to the mother or elder daughter to do the same without rest, without complaint, and without any thought of rest before nightfall. Breakfast itself is meager. This is no American-style spread with eggs and bacon sizzling in a pan. It's more likely to be yesterday's bread, stale, possibly a bit damp from the damp air, served with a pat of butter if you're lucky. Or more likely, just dripping with a thin scrape of lard. There might be porridge, thick and flavorless, cooked directly over the smoky fire. There is tea, perhaps brewed weak from reused leaves. Sugar is a luxury, and milk must be fetched fresh from the dairy. If it's spoiled, there's no alternative. You sit stiffly at a narrow wooden table. There are rules, even here. Children do not speak unless addressed. No one eats with elbows on the table. Slurping is frowned upon. Bread must be torn, not bitten into. There is no laughter, no casual phone scrolling, no soft music playing in the background. Only the sound of a spoon clinking against a ceramic bowl, the occasional cough, and the ticking of the clock on the wall. For those who work outside the home, men going to offices, boys to school, the day begins with a long walk through foggy, soot-filled streets. There is no car waiting, no Uber, no bike lane. Boots are worn, scuffed and stiff, and coats are heavy with rain. Inside the house, the women prepare to clean, so manage the home all over again. Laundry day, if it is today, will be its own private hell. And if you're the maid, you don't eat with the family. You eat later, standing up, perhaps scraping leftovers from the pot. No one thanks you. No one notices your red knuckles. The work continues, and the day stretches out before you like an endless uphill climb. And still, the house is cold. As the morning drags on, the realization sinks in that your body aching from a poor night's sleep and stiff from cold could use a wash. But unlike the modern luxury of stepping into a hot shower with just the turn of a knob, Victorian cleanliness is a slow, miserable process involving buckets, basins, and ice-cold water. There is no indoor plumbing in this typical household. If you want water, you or the maid must haul it in from a pump outside or from a public tap shared with neighbors. It's heavy, cold, and unpleasant. You pour it into a large ceramic basin perched on a washstand, and if you're especially lucky, you might be able to warm a bit of it over the hearth. Otherwise, you brace yourself and splash it on as best you can. Soap is not scented or luxurious. It's a coarse, lye-based block that scrapes at your skin, leaving it dry and sometimes raw. There is no shampoo-only harsh soap for the scalp, and washing your long hair means hours of drying it by firelight, hoping not to fall ill from the chill. No one washes every day. That would be absurd, unnecessary, even suspicious. A full bath might happen once a week, often on Saturday, and involves an awkward metal tub pulled into the kitchen, filled with water bucket by bucket. If you're the youngest, you might get clean water. If not, you bathe in the cloudy leftovers from someone else's turn. Toilets, forget it. The family uses chamber pots, tucked under the bed or placed discreetly in a corner. These must be emptied, often by a servant, or if there is no servant, by you. The smell is not something you can ignore. If you're lucky enough to live in a home with a privy in the back garden, the experience still involves braving the outdoors in your nightclothes, through rain, fog, or snow, to sit on a cold wooden seat above a dark fowl pit. And then there's the clothes. You can't just toss your garments into a washing machine. Laundry day is a dreaded event. It involves boiling water over the fire, stirring it with a paddle, scrubbing each item by hand on a washboard, and hanging everything to dry in a damp, smoky room. White fabrics quickly turn gray, and everything takes days to dry, completely if it ever really does. Body odor is a part of life. So is the sour smell of damp wool, the faint ammonia of chamber pots, and the lingering reek of coal smoke clinging to every layer of clothing. Perfume, when used, is strong and floral, not to delight, but to mask. You don't feel clean. You probably never truly do. And in the Victorian house, that's considered normal. You retreat back into what's supposed to be a place of rest, the bedroom, but there's no comfort here, not by modern standards. The room is dim even in daylight, its small window letting in only the weakest rays of the sun through layers of soot-streaked glass and a fog that seems to hang perpetually in the air. You begin to understand why so many Victorian paintings look grey, because life itself was. The bed itself is a curiosity. A heavy wooden frame groans under a lumpy straw-stuffed mattress, or perhaps horsehair if your family is better off. The sheets are coarse and rarely changed. The heavy coverlets weigh you down like armor. There are no electric blankets. Of course, only the hope that the stone bed warmer slipped beneath the sheets an hour ago has held on to some of its heat. But by now, it's stone cold. Your breath fogs in the air. The furniture is sparse, a small wooden chest for clothing, a basin and pitcher for washing, and perhaps a dressing mirror dulled by age. If you're poor, the bedroom might be shared with several family members. You sleep packed tightly with siblings or children to share warmth, the air thick with the smell of bodies and stale breath. Privacy, an illusion. You can hear every snore, cough, and creak of the house through thin walls and bare floorboards. In wealthier households, the room might be adorned with floral wallpaper, delicate lace, and elaborate curtains, but these offer little true comfort. The wallpaper peels from dampness, the lace gathers coal dust. Even the elegant furnishings feel more like decoration than warmth. Then there's the darkness. Without electricity, lighting is a battle against shadows. A single candle or an oil lamp flickers uncertainly, throwing long, strange shapes on the walls. If you're lucky, you might have gas lighting, but it hisses ominously, and everyone knows it can be dangerous. Carbon monoxide poisoning, fires, and explosions are very real risks, and people die in their sleep more often than anyone likes to admit. Nighttime in a Victorian house is not peaceful. It's when the mice begin to scurry inside the walls, when the boards creak under the weight of the house settling or something else. The cold deepens, the air grows damp. If you need to relieve yourself, you face the prospect of finding the chamber pot or braving the outdoor privy, stepping barefoot onto icy floorboards. You begin to understand why insomnia was common, why people wrote of nightmares and ghosts and spirits. In the gloom of this room, with the wind howling outside and no comforting hum of appliances or lights, the darkness has a life of its own. Sleep does not come easily, and when it does, it's often restless. You wake up shivering, again, still tired. The day is only beginning. As the early morning chill clings to your bones, you descend into the kitchen in search of warmth and sustenance. But forget any visions of sizzling bacon or fresh pastries. The Victorian kitchen is not a place of comfort, it's a place of necessity, and often, struggle. The room is cold and damp, even though the hearth fire has already been stoked. A haze of wood smoke hovers low in the air, scratching at your throat and stinging your eyes. If your family is poor, the hearth is both stove and central heating are blackened. Brick cavity that belches heat and smoke in unequal measure. The chimney draws poorly, and soot lines every surface. You brush dust off the table before sitting down. The food, if there is any, is plain. Perhaps a chunk of bread gone hard overnight, dunked in weak tea to soften it. If you're lucky, a smear of dripping or a spoonful of porridge might be available. The bread was likely baked days ago and is dense, coarse, and gritty with bran, and even sawdust in the worst of times. Milk, if you have it, may be watered down or already sour. Eggs, a luxury. Butter, a rare indulgence. For working-class families, meat is not an everyday affair. You eat what you can afford, usually little. A fried slice of bacon rind, reused from yesterday's dinner, might flavor the pan. It smells good, but the piece itself is barely a mouthful. Some families boil cabbage in the mornings to stretch out the week's rations. The smell lingers for hours, acrid and heavy. If you are a servant in a grand home, you're up even earlier, long before the master or mistress stirs. You've kindled the kitchen fire, polished brass, scrubbed pans, and begun preparing the upstairs breakfast: porridge, eggs, toast, and kidneys for people who won't even acknowledge your labor. Your own breakfast, when you finally get to it, might be a cold crust of bread and yesterday's tea leaves reused in boiling water. The kitchen itself is functional, but grim. Floors are stone or worn wood, often slick with spills and ash. The walls are streaked with years of grease, despite endless scrubbing. Rodents are frequent visitors. Traps are laid nightly, but they don't always work. You learn not to flinch when you hear a scurry behind the coal box. There is no refrigerator, of course only a cold pantry, and in summer food spoils fast. You learn to eat quickly and not ask what's in the sausage. You don't waste anything. A pot of tea might be reheated 3 times before being considered done. Scraps from the table are reused creatively, nothing is thrown away. Breakfast is not a cheerful, lazy start to the day. It is hurried, Spartan, and often silent. Everyone is cold, everyone is tired, and most are already thinking about the next meal or whether there will be one. As you finish your tea and scrape your plate clean, the fire crackles low. The air is still heavy with smoke. The dampness never really leaves the kitchen walls. And yet, outside, the city is already alive. Horses clatter, boots stomp, factories roar. It's time to join the day, and you're already exhausted. You rise from the kitchen table, your body still sluggish from the cold, your stomach only partially full. The tea has warmed you a bit, but not enough to distract you from another urgent matter. Nature calls. But in a Victorian house, especially one belonging to the working class, there is no flushing toilet, no sparkling porcelain bowl, no heated floor. There's just the chamber pot. You return upstairs to the cramped bedroom where you slept, eyes darting toward the corner beneath the bed. That's where the pot waits, like a dark secret. It's made of ceramic, simple, and unadorned. The lid doesn't do much to block the smell. You lift it with hesitation, trying not to breathe too deeply. There's no seat, no dignity, no privacy. You perch awkwardly, trying to keep your balance. The room is frigid, the pot is colder. If you lived in a slightly wealthier household, you might have had a wooden commode, a boxy piece of furniture with a removable chamber pot hidden inside. But most homes are more humble than that. In a tenement or rural cottage, the chamber pot might be shared among several people. If it's late at night, you use it in silence, hoping no one wakes and hears. If it's morning, someone is already carrying it out to be emptied, and that job, it's not one anyone wants. The pot must be taken to the backyard or the shared privy and dumped into a pit. Sometimes it's rinsed with cold water, sometimes not. If you live in a city, you might have to carry it down multiple flights of stairs and out to a communal outhouse barely more than a wooden shed perched over a cesspool. These outdoor toilets, called earth closets or night soil pits, are revolting. Flies swarm, the stench is unbearable, and the risk of disease is ever present. In some cases, People simply toss their waste into the street gutters, a practice that is technically illegal, but still widespread in poorer districts. And during the hot months, the smells rise into every window, especially when there's no proper sewer system in place. If you're a servant in a wealthier home, it's your job to empty not just one chamber pot, but many, dozens. You carry them carefully, trying not to spill, your arms aching, your stomach churning, and you must be discreet, never drawing attention to your task, never reminding the fine ladies and gentlemen of the bodily functions they prefer to forget. Victorian hygiene is a contradiction. The era is obsessed with respectability and appearance, yet the reality of waste management is squalid and unsanitary. Even with advancements in plumbing in some neighborhoods, many homes remain unchanged for decades. Diseases like cholera, typhoid, and dysentery thrive in such conditions. You might hear the term night soil men. These were workers who, under the cover of darkness, would collect the waste from cesspools and privets and cart it away. It was filthy, dangerous work. They were considered untouchables in urban society, but their labor was essential. Without them, the city would drown in its own filth. Once the chamber pot is emptied and rinsed, perhaps, with a splash of cold water from a bucket, you place it back under the bed. You never quite forget it's there. The smell lingers, the knowledge lingers, and tomorrow, it'll be full again. The truth of a Victorian bathroom, more lack thereof, is this. It's a place of discomfort, of embarrassment, of cold porcelain and colder air. It's an experience no one romanticizes, yet everyone lived with. And as you stand by the window and take in the early light filtering through coal smoke, you understand something very clearly. You would not last 24 hours here, not without flinching, not without recoiling, not without longing for the comforts of plumbing, warmth, and privacy. And it's only morning. The rising sun does little to thaw the bitter air seeping through the cracked panes of the bedroom window. You know it's time to wash at least your face and hands, but in a Victorian house, the ritual of cleanliness is nothing like the warm, steamy showers of the modern world. There is no bathroom, no tiled floor, no electric heater humming comfort into the chill. There's only the washstand. In the corner of the room stands a wooden table, and atop it, a ceramic basin and jug. The jug is filled with cold water, fetched either the night before or early in the morning, likely by a servant or one of the older children if you're in a working-class household. If the water wasn't collected in time, it might still be frozen over. You pour a bit into the basin. The sound is quiet but harsh in the still air. You stare at your reflection in the rippling water, a faint ghost, blurred by the murky surface and the poor light. You dip your fingers in and instantly regret it. It's ice-bone chilling. Every nerve in your hand recoils, but you force yourself onward, cupping the water, splashing it onto your face, wiping it with a scratchy linen cloth that has been used more times than you care to count. There is no soap, not for everyday washing, unless you're lucky. Good soap is expensive. Most families rely on rough lye soap, harsh on the skin, often homemade or bought in bulk. It leaves hands raw and reddened, especially in winter. You scrub your hands, your neck, and behind your ears, because those are the places people will see. You don't undress not for this. A full body wash is a luxury that might happen once a week, or once a month. Baths, if they happen at all, are an ordeal. Water must be boiled in kettles over the hearth and carried by hand to a tin tub placed in front of the fire. And that fire must be lit first, coaxed into life with coal or wood, neither of which is cheap. The bathwater cools rapidly, and the first bather always gets the cleanest soak. In a large family, the youngest or lowest-ranking person gets the last turn in murky, lukewarm water tinged grey with the day's collective grime. In wealthier homes, a more elaborate version of this ritual exists. Indoor plumbing might bring water to a private bathroom, though even this is far from universal before the turn of the century. In these homes, servants heat and carry the water, prepare the towels, and discreetly retreat before the master or mistress bathes. But for most, cleanliness is not about comfort. It's a daily performance of basic civility in a world that closely watches appearances. School teachers inspect children's fingernails. Employers might sniff at your collar. A dirty child might be sent home in shame, and a disheveled worker might lose his job. The smell of coal smoke, body odor, and damp clothing fills the house. Even after washing, there's always a lingering scent of unwashed fabric, of wet wool, of sweat beneath corsets and long underwear. The Victorian world is not a fragrant one. Perfumes, pomades, and scented waters exist, but they're used sparingly, often to mask rather than eliminate. You dry off with a thin towel and pull your shirt back down. The chill has soaked into your skin. Your hands are red and stiff. You long for a hot tap, a stream of warmth. the hiss of water on tile. But here cleanliness is a daily battle against cold, against poverty, against time. You leave the washstand as you found it, the basin water now tinged with grey. Someone else will use it later, or perhaps not at all. In this house, being clean is never about being comfortable. It's about survival, about respectability, about clinging to a shred of dignity in a world that offers precious little of it. And as you button your collar and brace yourself for the rest of the day, you understand that even washing your face, just your face, is a test of endurance. You wouldn't last 24 hours here, and the day has only just begun. The simple act of getting dressed in a Victorian house is not the quick 5-minute routine you might expect in the modern world. No jeans, no t-shirts, no elastic waistbands or slip-on shoes. In this world, even the act of putting on clothes is a ritual, a test of patience, propriety, and in many cases, pain. If you're a woman, it starts with your chemise, a plain, soft, long undershirt worn next to the skin. Then comes your drawers, split-crotch undergarments, if you're lucky enough to own them. After that, the layering begins. Corset first. The corset is not just a fashion item, it's a daily necessity. It's made of stiffened fabric and whalebone, designed to cinch your waist, lift your bust, and mold your figure to the ideal shape of the day. But this ideal shape comes at a cost. You stand before the mirror, or perhaps a sister or maid helps you. As the laces are pulled tight, tighter, you inhale, hold your breath, and wince as the pressure builds. Ribs compress. Your stomach has no room to expand. Breathing becomes shallower. The weight of the corset settles on your hips and spine. Women faint regularly, some develop lifelong spinal issues or digestive problems. But it's what's expected, you can't be seen without it. A woman who wears no corset is presumed either immoral, impoverished, or eccentric. Over the corset goes a petticoat or two, then a dress, likely wool or heavy cotton, depending on the season. In winter, that means sweltering weight indoors and bone-deep chill outside. Your boots lace high, your sleeves pinch at the armpits, and your hair must be twisted, braided, pinned, and sprayed into a structure that won't collapse during the day. If you're a man, the ritual is no less complicated. Your shirt is long and starched, often uncomfortable and stiff. Over it, you wear a waistcoat, sometimes more than one. Your cravat or necktie must be tied just so, requiring both precision and time. Trousers are high-waisted and suspenders are needed to keep them in place. A frock coat or morning coat finishes the ensemble, and don't forget the tall boots, polished, laced, and stiff. And all this assumes you're not preparing for a formal occasion. Then the layers multiply. Gloves, canes, fans, top hats, parasols, hatpins, shawls, and stays. The sheer amount of fabric worn, especially by women, can weigh upwards of 15 to 20 pounds. And once dressed, you're expected to carry yourself with poise and dignity, no matter the weather, the physical discomfort, or how long you've been wearing it. Dressing is not optional. Even the poor do what they can to maintain appearance. Second-hand markets are thriving. Families mend and remend garments, passing them down through siblings. There's pride in looking respectable, no matter how threadbare the clothes might be. But for all its dignity, this way of dressing is restrictive. You can't run, you can barely bend. Going to the toilet is a challenge. And once you've been cinched, pinned, buttoned, and tied into your clothing, there's little room to feel like a person. You become part of the costume, part of the image, an acceptable member of society, however quietly suffering you may be underneath. So, as you glance down at your tightly buttoned bodice or your stiff cravat, you feel the weight of expectation quite literally. Your ribs ache, your boots pinch. You are perfectly dressed, and completely trapped. As the long Victorian day draws to a close, you might imagine the bedroom offers a kind of refuge: warm blankets, flickering candlelight, the soft rustle of linen as you settle into rest. But don't be fooled. A night in a typical Victorian bedroom is less a peaceful retreat and more an endurance trial. Once again, the era conspires against comfort in a dozen quiet, unsettling ways. The room itself is small, often drafty, and poorly insulated. Central heating is a luxury found only in the grandest of mansions. For most households middle class or below, your only source of warmth is a small fireplace or, if you're lucky, a ceramic or metal bed warmer filled with hot coals. But even this is fleeting. Once the embers die out, the room turns frigid, especially in winter. The windows rattle, the floorboards creak with every gust of wind outside. Your breath fogs visibly in the air as you lie beneath a mountain of woolen blankets, and those blankets, heavy, itchy, often musty from years of use and exposure to soot, smoke, and damp air. The mattresses are stuffed with straw or horsehair, lumpy and uneven, Sheets are rarely washed, and when they are, it's a labor-intensive process involving boiling water, lye soap, and vigorous scrubbing, so they're changed as infrequently as possible. You're not alone either. Privacy is a rare commodity. You may be sleeping in the same bed with a sibling or two or a spouse you hardly know if your marriage was arranged. In poorer homes, entire families share the same small room. Every shift, cough, or sigh echoes in the silence. Some share their sleeping space with rats, bedbugs, and lice. Even in respectable households, infestations are common and rarely discussed aloud. The air is thick not from comfort, but from candles or oil lamps burning low, releasing soot and fumes. There's no such thing as ventilation beyond an open window, which few dare in the cold months. In some homes, wallpaper peels and mold creeps silently behind the walls, unrecognized as the health hazard it is. But perhaps the most unnerving part of all, relieving yourself, there's no indoor plumbing, not unless you're among the upper crust. So instead, you're left with the chamber patta porcelain or metal bowl placed discreetly under the bed or in a cabinet. If you need to go in the night, you rise from your warm cocoon, kneel in the freezing dark, and squat over the pot, hoping not to spill. The next morning, someone, likely a maid, wife, or daughter, will carry the full pot down the narrow staircase to be emptied, trying not to slosh it as they go. The stench lingers, always, and as you lie there, wrapped in scratchy wool, teeth chattering, bladder full, the darkness pressing in, you realize this is normal, this is expected, even comfortable by Victorian standards. Sleep, if it comes, is shallow. You stir each time the wind howls. You shiver when your feet brush against the cold wall of the bed frame. You dread the moment you have to leave your cocoon in the morning to wash your face with freezing water in a tin basin. The Victorian bedroom, less a sanctuary, more a quiet test of resilience. As evening drifts into the blackness of night, you might finally be allowed to climb the creaking staircase and make your way into the bedroom. But don't expect comfort or warmth. Victorian bedrooms, despite their heavy drapes and imposing furniture, were not cozy retreats. They were often cold, damp, and shadowed by superstition as much as silence. There's no central heating in this home. The fire in the grate below was stoked for the sitting room, not your room. Upstairs, the temperature can fall close to freezing during winter months. Your breath fogs the air, and the walls seem to sweat with condensation. The sheets, starched and cold, feel as though they've just been pulled from a block of ice. And yet, you must undress. If you're of the servant class, your nightwear might be little more than a coarse cotton shift, offering no protection from the bite of the air. For the middle class, a buttoned flannel gown or nightshirt might offer a touch more insulation, but not much. Climbing into bed is like slipping into a refrigerated tomb, especially since the sheets are unheated, and no one has thought to warm a brick or stone bottle to place by your feet. Insulation was poor, windows often rattled in their frames, and dampness crept in through cracks in the plaster. In grander homes, tapestries or heavy curtains might be hung along the walls to trap warmth, but even these were largely symbolic, more fashion than function. Then there's the question of privacy. Bedrooms were rarely fully your own. It was not uncommon for siblings to share beds, even adults, especially in working-class homes where space was limited, boundaries were fluid, and rest was not always peaceful. Coughing, snoring, or restless shifting was a nightly soundscape. Privacy, like luxury, was reserved for the few. Some homes kept chamber pots under the bed, but using one meant enduring the discomfort of smell and exposure, especially if you shared the room. In the dead of night, with no indoor plumbing, venturing to the cold privy or slop bucket was a dreaded necessity. Then, of course, there were the beliefs that came out in the dark. Many Victorians feared night air, believing it carried diseases like consumption or miasmas. Windows were often shut tight, locking in the chill, the damp, and the breath of multiple sleepers in a room. And let's not forget, superstition loomed over everything. Mirrors might be covered at night, and some families left a light burning to ward off evil spirits. So you pull the blanket, coarse wool, or perhaps a stitched eiderdown, up to your chin. You shiver, curl up, and try to quiet your thoughts. The bed is stiff, the pillow is thin, the room is pitch black. Sleep may not come easily, but you'll need it, because morning comes quickly, and it brings more soot, more labor, and another endless day inside this grim Victorian house. If you thought your restless sleep was interrupted only by cold drafts and stiff mattresses, think again. As the house settles into midnight silence, you may begin to hear the faint, sinister scurry of feet behind the walls. Welcome to one of the most persistent, uncomfortable realities of the Victorian home. the near-constant presence of pests. Vermin were everywhere. Even the more affluent homes couldn't completely keep them at bay. Mice, rats, cockroaches, and beetles found every opportunity to squeeze through the cracks in the floorboards and behind the old plaster. They made nests in pantries, crept into bedding, and even occasionally nibbled on soap, one of the few vaguely scented items available in a working-class washroom. It wasn't just the pests either. It was the slow, relentless decay of everything. Victorian homes were not sealed up, insulated cocoons. They were porous, breathing things, full of drafty joints, rotting floorboards, mildew-stained corners, and peeling wallpaper. Maintenance was a never-ending battle, one that most families couldn't afford to win. The kitchen floor might be stained with years of grease and ashes. Upstairs, the skirting boards might be crumbling from damp. Wood was everywhere, but rarely varnished, sealed, or protected from rot. And because coal, dust, and fireplace soot settled on every surface, there was a permanent layer of grime that seemed immune to scrubbing. Cleaning was constant, but never victorious. Women scrubbed the floors on hands and knees with soap made from animal fat and soda ash. Boiling water was hauled and used to clean chamber pots or wash soiled linens. Yet no matter how hard you tried, the home always seemed one step ahead in its campaign to fall apart. Now imagine the smell. In the better homes, servants spent hours daily trying to air out rooms and beat dust from the heavy curtains and cushions. But in smaller dwellings, stale air mixed with damp wool, smoke, old cooking grease, and human waste clung to every room. Even in winter, windows might be cracked open a finger's width just to chase some of it out. The result, a freezing house that still somehow smelled of decay. And amidst all this, diseases flourished. Typhus, tuberculosis, diphtheria, all of them found cozy refuge in this moist, crowded, vermin-infested environment. Doctors were expensive and hygiene was misunderstood. Few connected poor ventilation or rotting conditions to sickness. More often, it was chalked up to bad blood or divine punishment. This was not a rare ordeal. It was the daily experience of millions. So as you stir in your narrow bed, curling deeper into scratchy blankets, trying to avoid the imagined scratch of tiny feet on the wall, remember, you're not alone in this house, not just in the sense of crowded families. The house itself is alive in its own decaying way, full of creaks, cracks, and uninvited guests that no amount of effort will ever fully drive out. And this was normal. The day begins before the sun rises. There is no gentle alarm, no aromatic coffee brewing from an automatic pot. Instead, it's the distant chime of a church bell, the clatter of hooves on cobblestone streets, or the groan of a neighbor's front door opening that signals it's time to wake. If you've even slept at all. For the average Victorian, especially in a working-class household, the morning begins in bitter cold. The hearth has gone out hours ago, and the single layer of coals remaining in the grate offer no warmth. You rise reluctantly from bed, your breath visible in the frigid air, and pull on yesterday's stiff, slightly damp clothes. Washing is minimal. A splash of freezing water from the jug, perhaps. No central heating, no hot running water, and certainly no bath. Your first task might be to relight the kitchen fire. This is no simple flick of a switch. You kneel before the ash-choked grate, your fingers numb as you strike flint to steel or coax a few matches to ignite. Kindling is precious. Coal must be rationed. It may take a good 20 minutes to coax the fire back to life, and only then can you begin to think about boiling water for tea or porridge. If you're a servant, your day has begun even earlier. You must scrub the front steps with cold water and carbolic soap, polish boots, sweep the hearth, empty chamber pots, and make breakfast for the family, all before they rise. There is no room for delay. A moment's hesitation could mean a scolding, or worse, dismissal. The household quickly stirs to life. Children are dressed in hand-me-downs, often stiff with wear. They may eat a crust of bread or a spoonful of gruel before being sent off to school, or, if they're old enough, to the factory floor. Men prepare for long days at the docks, in mines, or in soot-stained workshops. Their breakfast is quick and quiet, often eaten standing. For women, there is no commute. The work is already here. They scrub, mend, wash, and prepare. Laundry day is a nightmare in itself, involving boiling linens in giant pots, wringing them out by hand, then hanging them in narrow sunless alleys to dry. Everything is done without appliances, and every movement is physical. You don't just tidy, you labor. The entire routine is governed by light, or the absence of it. As dawn breaks, the gray light filters through soot-streaked windows, finally illuminating the cracked walls and sagging floorboards. Lamps sputter out, There is no time for reflection. The day's machinery has already started grinding. Even the food, when there is some, does not offer respite. Victorian diets were heavy, bland, and repetitive. Tea with a splash of milk, bread, possibly stale, a lump of cheese or suet pudding if you were lucky. No refrigeration meant spoilage was common. You learned to eat quickly, quietly, and with gratitude. No one pauses to ask if you're well rested. No one wonders about your dreams. In a Victorian household, survival is a ritual, and morning is just the beginning of another exhausting cycle. The idea of taking it slow doesn't exist. Leisure is for the elite, for you. Each morning is a contest against the cold, the dirt, the hunger, and the clock, and it will repeat itself tomorrow and the day after that. Let's say you're a woman in the Victorian household. Perhaps you're a middle-class wife, or maybe a young servant girl dressing for the day. Either way, your experience of getting dressed is far from simple, and even further from comfortable. It's not just about fashion, it's about layers, restriction, and a daily ritual of discomfort that begins the moment you touch your first garment. There's no tossing on a blouse and skirt in 5 minutes. First comes the chemise, a simple long cotton undergarment that sits against the skin. Over that goes the corset. And this is where things get difficult. The corset isn't just clothing, it's an iron rule, tight-laced and boned with steel or whalebone. It's cinched to a precise measurement, meant to force the waist into the ideal hourglass shape. It doesn't matter if your body disagrees. Breathe in, pull the strings, and brace for pressure. You don't do this yourself. Most women need help. A maid, a sister, a mother, someone standing behind you, tugging hard until your ribs compress and your back straightens. The effect is immediate. Your breathing becomes shallow. Your torso feels locked in place. Bending, forget it. Eating a full meal, risky, but you look refined, and that is what matters, and we're only getting started. Next come the layers. A petticoat or two, maybe even 3. Then the stockings, which are held up by garters that dig into your thighs as you move. Then the crinoline or bustle cage, depending on the decade. It's made of stiffened fabric, or sometimes metal hoops, designed to flare your skirt outward in an exaggerated silhouette. And over all of that, the dress itself, heavy, layered, often with buttons up the back that you can't reach on your own. Then the gloves, the boots, which button or lace tightly up the ankle and rub mercilessly against the heel. A bonnet or hat, fastened with a pin through your styled hair. If you're wealthier, perhaps jewelry, brooches, a parasol. If you're a servant, fewer layers, but still a corset, still stockings, still the ache of laboring under restrictive clothing. And then, once you're finally dressed, what do? Chores. Endless chores, cooking, scrubbing, sewing, climbing stairs while skirts threaten to trip you, carrying coal scuttles and water buckets while trying not to burst your seams. Even sitting down becomes an ordeal, as the corset resists and the rigid skirts pile around you like insulation. For men, too, the dress code was unforgiving. Starched collars, woolen waistcoats, cravats tied precisely at the neck, shoes polished daily, even if the cobbled streets outside were soaked in mud and filth. Trousers that chafed, shirts that clung, coats that weighed down the shoulders. Clothing in the Victorian home wasn't made for movement, it was made for image, and if you didn't conform, you were shamed, seen as lazy, improper, or worse. But what the outward world didn't see was what it felt like. The red marks on the skin, the difficulty breathing, the bruised ribs, the fainting spells, the sweat trapped beneath layers of fabric, the unrelenting pressure to keep up appearances in a society that valued elegance over ease. To live in a Victorian house was to be dressed in discomfort, every hour, every day, until even your own body no longer felt like your own. Let's step down into the basement, where the heart of the Victorian household pulses in an atmosphere thick with soot, sweat, and the smell of boiling bones. The kitchen, far from the polished centerpiece of a modern home, was a place of fire, grime, and relentless labor. Not a cozy nook for Sunday baking, but a dungeon of obligation, where time moved by the turning of a spit and the scraping of a pan. The fire is always going, always, not for warmth, but for necessity. A great black range sits along one wall, iron-bellied and glowering. You don't simply turn it on, you coax it to life. You feed it coal, stoke it, pray it draws well so the smoke rises through the chimney and not into your lungs. It heats the oven, the stovetop, the kettles, and on bad days, the entire room swelters, even in winter. You're already sweating, and the day has just begun. Everything must be made from scratch. There is no pre-packaged anything, no refrigeration. Meat arrives from the butcher, sometimes still warm. Vegetables are often wilted. Milk spoils by noon in the summer, bread must be kneaded, risen baked, and you'll need to sweep the ash off the loaves if you set them too near the fire. The work never stops. A servant in charge of the kitchen, often the cook, sometimes with a scullery maid beneath her, rises before anyone else. Breakfast must be ready before the master descends from his bedchamber. That means porridge, hot tea, eggs and toast, maybe even fish, all prepared in the dim glow of dawn, with your hands blackened before sunrise. There are no food processors, no mixers. If you want cream, you churn it. If you want breadcrumbs, you grate them by hand. Boiling water takes ages. First you must pump it from the well or haul it from the scullery tap, pour it into the iron kettle, and wait for the range to do its slow work. Even something as simple as tea becomes a multi-step task. Cleaning is worse. There is no sink with a disposal unit. Instead, greasy pans are scrubbed with ash and coarse cloth, sometimes with a dab of lye soap that burns the skin. Dishes are fragile, chipped, and have to be dried by hand. Spills mean scrubbing the stone or wood floors with stiff brushes and sore knees. If you're a member of the household, not a servant, you may never see these back-breaking rituals. Meals appear as if by magic in the dining room, but if you are a cook or maid, the kitchen is your world. A sweltering soot-stained cavern where your back bends, your hands crack, and every meal is a quiet war against time and rot. The air hangs thick with steam and grease. Mice skitter in the corners, and cockroaches are a constant concern. You might be working while bleeding, coughing, or nursing burns. There is no sick leave, no breaks, no gratitude. Just more bread to knead, more water to boil, more coal to shovel into the belly of the range. And the clock ticks on. Living even a single day in a Victorian house means facing the kitchen, whether as a servant bowed by duty or a lady fretting over spoiled milk and undercooked lamb. Either way, the kitchen is no comfort. It is a trial, and it never ever rests. As the evening shadows stretch across the creaking floorboards, you climb the stairs to your bedroom, perhaps hoping for some relief. But a Victorian bedroom isn't the cozy retreat you might expect. It's a room of strict order, stillness, and discomfort hidden beneath layers of lace and etiquette. The air is cold. Even in summer, the stone and plaster walls trap the chill. In winter, your breath fogs in front of your face, even indoors. Most bedrooms have no fireplace, or if they do, it remains unlit to save coal. You clutch a candle for light, shielding the flame from drafts that snake through the ill-fitted windows and under the door. The bed is large, but not soft. Stuffed with horsehair or straw, the mattress resists your body with a firm, unyielding surface. You pull back the heavy bedspread to reveal linen sheets that feel damp no matter how many times they've even been dried. In colder months, you might be lucky to have a hot brick or metal bed warmer slid between the covers before sleep. But even then, it quickly cools, and your body stiffens in the deep night. The room is oddly sparse. A small basin and pitcher sit atop a washstand, your only method of cleaning unless you head downstairs for the tin bath. There's no running water, no indoor toilet, no sink. You brush your teeth with a mixture of chalk and soot, or maybe salt, and spit into the basin which must be emptied in the morning. Walls are thin, sounds carry. A cough from the hallway, the clatter of a coal scuttle, the wind howling down the chimney. Everything feels closer, louder. Privacy is a fiction in a house like this. Even when doors are closed, the windows are grand in appearance, often draped in layers of thick curtains to block drafts and prying eyes. But they let in little light and even less warmth. The glass may rattle in the wind, and in colder months ice forms on the inside panes, a reminder that insulation is still decades away from any real sophistication. And the atmosphere, is oddly oppressive. The Victorian obsession with morality, modesty, and cleanliness clings to the room like dust in the corners. You're expected to sleep upright if ill, avoid lying in too long, and never be seen in a state of undress, even in private. Nightclothes are modest, cumbersome, and made of coarse cotton or flannel. Nothing is easy, nothing is soft. If you're a child, your room might be shared with siblings or a nanny. Toys are hard and handmade, no comforting plush animals or glowing nightlights. If you're sick, you stay in bed for days or weeks with only bitter tonics and prayer to comfort you. And if you're elderly, the cold bedroom becomes a kind of slow prison. In these rooms, dreams rarely come easy. The wind groans in the rafters, mice scratch in the walls, and the cold clutches your fingers and toes. You curl into yourself beneath itchy blankets, trying not to move, for fear of waking yourself with the jolt of icy sheets. To sleep in a Victorian bedroom is to court discomfort, to lie in a shell of restraint and quiet suffering. The decor may be elegant, but beneath the polish lies a truth. This is not a sanctuary, but another chamber of endurance. And the night has only just begun. When the lamps are extinguished and the last coals fade to grey, the Victorian house descends into a silence that isn't peaceful. It's suffocating, the kind of silence that amplifies every creak of wood, every tick of the mantel clock, every half-imagined shuffle in the hallway. The house doesn't sleep so much as it waits. It's not just the darkness that feels different in this era. Without electricity, there are no standby lights glowing softly in the corner, no ambient hum from distant appliances, no warm orange glow from streetlights beyond the windows. There is only blackness, the kind that presses in from all sides, interrupted only by moonlight when it chooses to visit through thin curtains or imperfect panes. The temperature drops noticeably. Even under layers of woolen blankets and with a nightcap pulled low, your breath forms a faint mist in the cold room. If you shift, the sheets greet you with a slap of icy fabric. Victorian bedrooms are not heated spaces. Heat is for parlors and guests, not wasted on the intimate hours of the night. And there are other reasons rest doesn't come easy. Many Victorians were deeply superstitious. Ghosts weren't seen as entertainment, but as very real inhabitants of the night. Death was an everyday presence, from diphtheria, typhus, consumption, and many homes had known their share of loss. It was not uncommon to hear stories of death knocking at the window, or of lingering spirits in the hallway where someone once passed. The silence doesn't feel empty, it feels watched. The boards in the hallway groan even when no one walks them. A single thump might come from the attic, or the cellar, or the wall behind your bed. Mice, settling timber, or something remembered by the house. You wouldn't be the first to imagine it. Some families even covered mirrors at night to prevent the soul from wandering. A cracked mirror was considered more than bad luck. It was an invitation. If you needed the privy, there was no easy path. You'd either use the chamber pot beneath your bed cold and exposed, or you'd have to creep down the stairs with a flickering candle in one hand, hoping you didn't stumble into a draught or disturb the master of the house. A stumble in the dark could mean a broken wrist. There were no railings as we know them now, just steep, narrow stairs, worn slick by years of footsteps. In wealthier homes, a servant might pass through the halls late at night, checking for embers or delivering a warm drink. But in the dim stillness, even that soft tread could feel like an apparition. If you were poor or living alone, you were more likely to be woken by the sound of your own stomach growling, or the wind shifting roof slates, or a distant dog barking at something unseen. Outside, the streets lie abandoned. Cobblestones glisten with frost or soot. Gaslights flicker weakly, and the fog ever-present clings low and thick. If there was a crime, a sickness, or a birth, it would wait until morning to be known. Night was for patience, and for secrets. Lying in bed, you feel the full weight of the house, not just physically, but historically. Generations lived and died in the same rooms. Their wallpaper, their portraits, their secrets remain. You feel the rhythm of their breathing, their weeping, their prayers etched into the floorboards. Even if it's not haunted in the spectral sense, a Victorian house is undeniably full of memory, of silence, of time. And so you lie there, unmoving, beneath your scratchy blanket. Your candle has burned low. The cold has crept into your bones. Sleep does not come easily here, not because you're not tired, but because the night doesn't let you forget where you are. You're not in the modern world. You are in a Victorian house, and the night, long still and watching, has only just begun. In most Victorian houses, even modest ones with any semblance of status, there existed a strict, invisible boundary between the family and the servants. This divide was not only social but spatial. The servants' domain was often tucked away, down narrow staircases, behind paneled doors, or even entirely beneath the main floors and cellars and basements. These spaces were hidden from the genteel view, but they throbbed with constant, unseen labor. You would not last long here. Below the stairs, the day for a servant did not begin with the rising sun. It began well before it. Before the family stirred, before the house groaned awake with footsteps or fires, the servants were already hard at work. A maid might rise in absolute darkness to lay the kitchen fires or blacken the grates. She would do so in silence, cold to the bone, careful not to make a sound that might reach the bedrooms above. Her hands, often raw and cracked, would move with muscle memory, learned from repetition and fear of punishment. The kitchen was the engine room of the house. It was loud, warm, chaotic, filled with clanging pots, bubbling broths, and the relentless hiss of boiling kettles. But even in the heat, servants rarely got warm. Their uniforms were plain, often ill-fitting and rarely insulated. They layered thin cotton over aching muscles and wrapped threadbare shawls around their shoulders to keep the chill at bay. Beneath the floors of elegance there was no luxury. The servants' quarters were cramped, low-ceilinged, and smelled faintly of damp and coal. Sleep was a luxury when it came. It was shallow, interrupted, and often taken in rooms that doubled as storage or utility space. Some maids slept in closets, others in attic crawl spaces so small they could not stand upright. Privacy didn't exist. Dignity, too, was often in short supply. Meals were hurried, plain, and often eaten standing up. A crust of bread, some gruel, maybe a scrap left over from the family's table if you were lucky. The cook might taste the master's beef, but the scullery maid, she'd be grateful for potato peelings. The hierarchy below stairs was just as rigid as the one above. The butler reigned over the male staff with a calm, commanding demeanor. The housekeeper, severe and sharp-eyed, managed the female servants. Maids answered to both, and to the whims of the lady of the house. A misplaced button or forgotten errand could result in dismissal. There was no job security, no rights, just obedience. Perhaps most painful of all was invisibility. Servants were expected to be present yet unseen, to slip in and out of rooms without a whisper, to set the table, scrub the chamber pots, iron the linens, and polish the silver, all without being noticed. If you were noticed, it meant you had made a mistake. If you were heard, you might be punished. You existed to erase mess, soften noise, and smooth the fabric of upper-class comfort. And for this labor, this life of endless motion and silence, you might earn a few shillings a month, just enough to survive, never enough to escape. Some servants worked from the age of 10, others were born into service, following mothers or fathers who had toiled in the same household. Rarely was there a choice. For many working-class girls, becoming a maid was one of the few paths available. It offered shelter and meals, but at the cost of freedom, youth, and selfhood, and still, they kept going. Lighting fires, fetching water, polishing shoes, turning mattresses, washing clothes by hand in icy water, scrubbing floors on their knees, and never, ever sitting down when there was still work to be done. If you found yourself in a Victorian servant's role, bent over a washtub, hands raw, body sore, ignored by the family who lived above, you might think of escape, but where would you go? Who would take you in? You had no time, no money, and no name, the world remembered. And so, below the stairs, the servants toiled on, ghost-like in their invisibility, yet very much alive in the heartbeat of the house. Now imagine this. The cold has settled in. It's late December in a Victorian house, and outside the soot-darkened windows, a heavy frost covers the cobblestones. Your breath fogs in the hallway. The house, proud and ornate from the outside, is an icebox within. You might think a roof over your head and four walls would offer protection from the bitter winter chill. But in a Victorian home, the cold was often an uninvited guest that lingered in every room. There was no central heating. Each room, if lucky, had a fireplace. But those were expensive to keep burning. Coal wasn't free, and the family might restrict fires to only the most important spaces. The drawing room, the master's study, the nursery perhaps. The rest of the house remained frigid, bedrooms especially. At night, the fires were allowed to die, and you'd retreat under heavy covers, wrapping yourself in shawls, socks, and maybe even your coat. The glass of water beside your bed might freeze by morning. Bathrooms, not heated. Water, cold unless manually boiled. Taking a bath in winter was a task of sheer endurance. First, a servant would lug buckets of water from the kitchen kettle to the bathroom, trip after trip after trip. By the time the tub was ready, the water was already cooling, and the room still icy. You'd lower yourself in, breath-catching at the shock of it. Steam rising in clouds, yet unable to warm the air around you. The walls of Victorian houses were made of thick brick or stone, excellent at holding in the cold. Drafts slipped through window frames, under doors, and down chimneys. People would stuff cracks with rags or old newspapers. Windows were often kept curtained day and night in a desperate attempt to keep in any warmth. You dressed in layers, even indoors. Men wore waistcoats, women wore woolen shawls, and children were bundled like dolls. Undergarments, stockings, skirts, trousers, gloves. There was no such thing as comfortable loungewear. Clothing was about survival. You never truly felt warm. You just got used to being cold. And then there were the chores that winter made even more brutal. Laundry froze on the line, water buckets turned to blocks of ice. Walking outside for coal or firewood could be treacherous, with ice-licked steps and numb fingers, hands chapped, lips split. Feet remained soaked from slushy streets and never seemed to dry. Illness followed close behind. Colds, flu, pneumonia, all flourished in these conditions. If you were poor, medicine was a luxury, and staying warm was the only defense. For children and the elderly, winter could be fatal. Even the wealthy weren't immune to winter's reach. Their grand homes might have more fireplaces and better coal stocks, but they still walked across freezing tile floors, still dressed in layers, still watched frost crawl across the inside of their windows at dawn. Candles sputtered in the chill, ink froze in its pot, pipes burst, and still the days had to go on. Meals were cooked, floors were scrubbed, letters were written with stiff fingers. Life didn't pause for the season. In winter, the Victorian home became a quiet battlefield. Warmth was precious, fleeting, and unevenly distributed. You might huddle in a single heated room, trying to keep fingers moving, breath warm, eyes open. The house creaked around you, shadows stretched across wallpaper, and when the sun finally dipped below the skyline at 4 p.m., the darkness swallowed you in silence, broken only by the hiss of coal and the wind clawing at the shutters. It was beautiful, perhaps, in the way hardship sometimes is, when remembered from the safety of a warmer time. But living through it, you'd shiver, ache, and count the days until spring, and even then, spring would come slowly, damp, grey, and cold. As twilight settles over your Victorian home, a heavy hush begins to fall. Shadows stretch long through the hallways, gas lamps sputter softly, casting flickers across faded wallpaper, revealing the fine dust that never quite disappears, no matter how often the maid scrubs. The fire in the hearth has dwindled to glowing coals. It is time for bed, but sleep is a slow visitor in a house like this. You might expect rest, now that the day's noise has gone quiet, but night in a Victorian house has its own symphony. Creaks, groans, distant rats in the walls, wind through gaps in the eaves. The boards beneath your feet whisper as you climb the stairs, candle in hand, the flame dancing with every draft. A gust sneaks through the unsealed window at the landing, nearly extinguishing your light. You shield it with your palm and move on. The house smells of damp wool, scorched oil, old soap, and soot. In your bedroom, there is no heat. The fireplace is unused to save coal. The bed is high and hard, with a straw mattress beneath coarse sheets and heavy woolen blankets. You must warm it with your own body. You slip beneath the covers, fully dressed, even wearing your nightcap and socks. Outside, the streets are mostly quiet, now only the occasional echo of a cart, or the distant clop of hooves. Inside, the air grows colder by the hour. There is no hum of appliances, no gentle thrum of modern heating, just stillness. You hear the ticking of a mantel clock in the hallway, and the drip of condensation from the ceiling into a tin basin below. Sleep, when it comes, is uneasy. The house was not built for comfort. Your body aches from the hardness of the mattress, your nose stings from the cold, your ears strain for sounds, fearing a break-in, a fire, a child's cry in the night, or simply the nagging sense that the silence might mean something's wrong. The dreams are peculiar, half-formed things shaped by gaslight and worry. You might wake in the darkness, not knowing the hour, the fire now cold, your candle burned down. There's nothing to do but wait until morning, and when it comes, it brings no relief. Just another day of repetition: coal to haul, water to heat, floors to scrub, letters to write, corsets to tighten, boots to shine, and always the lingering cold, the rigid hierarchy, the constant, invisible labor it takes just to live. In the end, it isn't just the discomfort that would break you in a Victorian house at S, the relentless effort of it all, the weight of rituals, expectations, smells, silence, and shivers, the labor of survival wrapped in brocade and brass. You wouldn't last 24 hours, not because you are weak, but because the house demands too much, and tomorrow it will demand it all over again. Sleep well, if you can.